folks. Welcome to the Hawk Fanatic Mailbag Podcast, live streaming for the first time ever here on YouTube. This is my morning outfit and the coffee. You'll be able to see coffee sips on the YouTube live that you only get to hear previously. This is going to be really non-professional, especially without Scott Docterman helping me. You can listen to us on the Hawk Fanatic Hawkeye Hotspot podcast on Thursdays. Usually live stream that around 9 a.m. Central Time. It is about 9:35 a.m. Central Time right now for those listening on the podcast and not on the live stream. Or if you're watching on the live stream and aren't looking at a clock, that works as well. So there you go. This is kind of a piecemeal type podcast where I read your questions and comments off of Twitter that are sent to me using the hashtag HFMail. If you do not use the hashtag, I often do not see your questions. So it's HFMail. You can use that tag, hashtag HFMail, anytime during the week. I will go back where I left off the previous week's podcast and pick up there and answer your questions that are sent my way using the hashtag again. So there you go. Usually kind of lead in with, what the latest, what's going on in Iowa sports now. We've got kind of a collision of men's, women's basketball, wrestling, and football recruiting. Tomorrow, February the 1st, is the late signing period, the original signing period. Back in the day, we used to have blowouts on Wednesdays in February when there was a big signing day. That's when everybody signed. So kind of different now, a little anticlimactic, but Iowa will have added a couple of transfer portal guys, offensive linemen, Dejon Parker from Saginaw State in Michigan, who was committed to Virginia as a transfer portal guy until Iowa flipped him. I think it was first week of January. And then Rusty Feth, a center guard from Miami of Ohio, who Iowa offensive line coach George Barnett coached when he was at Miami of Ohio, officially visited this past weekend and committed. So Iowa added a couple of offensive linemen with college experience, which is nothing but a bonus with the inconsistencies that we saw up front last year on the offensive line. So nice additions there. So I guess they will be officially added. And I'm sure Parker's in class now, and Feth will have to. He is a graduate transfer, Feth is, and has 1 year remaining. And we'll have to take some grad classes this semester, be here for spring semester, I believe. I haven't had a chance to talk to him. He's been unreachable, at least for me. Hopefully we get a chance to talk to him at some point, and all of the grad transfer or the transfer portal guys for that matter. Cade McNamara, Eric All, Seth Anderson, Parker, Feth. We haven't the quarterback from Wisconsin, Deacon Hill. I was going to say Deacon Jones. Remember him on the Brady Bunch? Wasn't Deacon Jones on an episode of the Brady Bunch in the Glee Club? I'm dating myself, and a lot of you people probably have no idea what I'm talking about. But anyway, so Iowa added 5 or 6 in the portal, but it'd be nice to eventually get a chance to talk to some of those guys about, their reasonings, the reason for being here, and what they bring to the team and all that good stuff, and just get to know them a little bit. It's always fun to get to know the student athletes a little closer and be able to tell you guys those stories. But signing day is tomorrow. Iowa also got a couple of high school commitments, one from 2023 Fort Wayne Homestead tight end Grant Leeper, who has accepted a gray shirt opportunity after officially visiting Wake Forest on Thursday and Friday of last week, and was here at Iowa on Saturday and Sunday, and then announced his commitment yesterday. Did an interview with Grant, and he's hoping and feels there's a good opportunity that he'll be put on a full scholarship by the start of the season. If you don't know what a gray shirt is, it's basically he would be in the 24 class. I think he would be classified in the 24 class if he does stick with the gray shirt. What that means is he could come into Iowa after graduation this summer and in the fall, but he has to pay his way and he can't practice with the team. He can be here, he can use the facilities, but he has to work out on his own. It's kind of a goofy rule, but unless you're going to, have an unlimited amount of scholarships above the 85, you have to have some restrictions in place, and that's what it is for a gray shirt. So then he would be here in the summer and the fall, and then be able to in January go on scholarship where we are this time next year in January of 24. And I think he'd be recognized as part of the 2024 recruiting class. And then Josh Janowski, an offensive lineman from Lincoln Way West, right? Is it West or East? I can't remember. I believe it's West. Committed yesterday, and he is in the 2024 class. And that's in Frankfort, Illinois, which is Chicago suburbs ish. Is he Lincoln Way? Lincoln Way East, my bad. I'm sure I offended people from Lincoln Way East saying it was Lincoln Way West. Is there even a Lincoln Way West? I assume there is. There's a North Liberty and a West Liberty, but no East Liberty in Iowa or South Liberty. So you tell me what's going on. Anyway, actually, I don't have anybody in the chat room. Maybe this wasn't the best idea to open up the chat room. Ooh, I got a weird sun thing happening now. I just clicked on the Zoom to see my ugly face. All right, let me bring up some questions here. We also will talk about some more Iowa men's basketball tonight, and I believe there are tickets remaining. It's the Chris Street game that was postponed earlier this month when Northwestern was shut down with COVID and couldn't play. Had to reschedule games against Iowa and Wisconsin. Has played Wisconsin, I think, already, and will be in at Carver Hawkeye tonight. The original game was a Saturday, I believe. And no, that was a night game during the week too at 8 o'clock, I think. But tonight's game is 8 o'clock at Carver Hawkeye Arena. It is the Chris Street game, makeup from the original game with Northwestern. That is on the Big Ten Network. Mike and Patty Street will have a press conference before the game, and they'll have some recognition, I'm sure, during the game, maybe halftime, for the Street family on the 30th anniversary of Chris's tragic death in a car accident in Iowa City. So if you can get out tonight, I know 8 o'clock, weeknight, school night, work night. We've all been there before. We understand that there are drawbacks to going to 8 o'clock games during the week, and it's cold. It's really freaking cold in Iowa City. So, but get out there if you can. Hopefully, I know Mike Halas from the Gazette tweeted something out yesterday. I don't know which ticket service he was citing. Maybe it was StubHub or one of those where tickets were like $5 for tonight's game. So you can get in pretty cheap, and I would recommend doing that. I think it's going to be a really great environment and a super important game. Northwestern is second place in the Big Ten right now. Iowa's at 5-5 and could really use another win tonight before facing Illinois in a sold-out game Saturday, 1:30 p.m. at Carver Hawkeye Arena on Fox. That's this Saturday, February the 4th, one day before our middle child's birthday. Happy birthday, Lila. Against Illinois, that's Saturday at 1:30. On the women's side, women have a big game. Women moved up to number 6 in the rankings this week, and will play host to number 8 Maryland on Thursday at Carver Hawkeye Arena, and that is a 7:30 p.m. tip, and that is on ESPN, the regular ESPN. So really a lot of spotlight on Iowa right now when it comes to the basketball teams, nationally televised games. So definitely check that out. From a wrestling standpoint, tough loss at Penn State on Friday night. That was 1-2. I got an email this morning saying that was the most watched wrestling duel on the network in the history. So huge. Iowa back on the road again this Friday, and that's up at Minnesota, and that's at 8 p.m. First match scheduled, and that's on the Big Ten Network. Iowa has 3 duels left, only 3 and only 2 in the Big Ten. It's got Friday, February the 3rd, Minnesota and Minneapolis. Then the senior, the last home duel. Actually, it's not senior day because, Oklahoma State comes in for senior day. But Friday the 10th, Michigan comes to Iowa City. And then Sunday, February 19th is senior day against Oklahoma State, 3:30. All of those are on the Big Ten Network. And then March 4th through 5th, the Big Ten Wrestling Championships are in Ann Arbor this year, and then March 16th through 18th, NCAA tournament in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So these seasons are it's February 1st tomorrow, kids. It's getting along. So it will. I saw somebody in the chat room, Hair Trigger 83. I'm here just listening. LOL. Thanks for listening. At least somebody's out. At least I'm not talking to myself. Which often happens, and my wife catches me doing as we are home. We work from home, so share an office here. Anyway, let's jump into some questions. Let's go back here. January 25th, so 6 days ago, roughly. Drake Timbers, a regular contributor to the Mailbag Podcast. Would Rusty's addition, and he's talking about Rusty Feth, again, transfer interior offensive lineman from Miami of Ohio. He was a second-team All-MAC selection this past season and academic All-American as well. So good student, good athlete, and good addition for Iowa. Would Rusty's addition be enough center depth for Ellsbury, that's Tyler Ellsbury, to breach the starting lineup like the invention of time travel, which will destroy linear time and the concept of ownership, like patents and copyrights, which rely on linear time? As I do with Drake's questions, I kind of just let them marinate for you guys, and you can do with them what you will. It's a bit existential, a lot of the questions. So there you go. I will say again, though, in relation to Ellsbury, he's going to have to break through wherever it may be. I'm interested to see where Feth ends up, because I have confidence that Logan Jones is going to get better. I think he has that starter kit. It was just tough. He was thrown into the mix last year after not having played much center and being switched over from defense. He had less than a year, 6 months or something to prepare roughly, maybe more than that. If he moved over bowl prep-ish time last year, and that would have been 2021, he had until August. But still, it's a crash course, and he took his lumps this year, but I think he's going to be much better this year. That said, Feth could potentially beat him out for center and maybe bump Logan over to a guard. Logan may hold down center, and Feth comes in and plays guard along with Colby. So there you have your 3 interior offensive linemen, Colby on the left, Jones in the middle, Feth on the right. I think Colby's pretty solid at that left guard. I think they'd like to see if Parker can play right tackle, but then you also have Nick DeYoung that's out at right tackle. So there are a lot of pieces. And there are younger guys. Jennings Dunker is, a kid that made progress this year as well. So there's going to be some good competition on the offensive line. I think Feth and Parker, having played college football before, come in obviously ahead of the true freshmen that are coming in this year, but also potentially ahead of some developing guys that are, lower down on the depth chart. So I just think you needed competition at that position. You're adding some experience. You're adding, in Feth, you're adding a guy who's played FBS football in a good conference, which is the MAC, and succeeded there. I mean, all conference. We'll see if he can make that transition to Power 5 and Big Ten football. Certainly, he's got enough years under his belt and should be physically capable of doing it. Parker is an interesting project as well. Project's probably the wrong term. He's still pretty raw, I would say. So he needs some development there, but it'd be interesting to see what type of contributions he could make. I just think after what we saw last year on the offensive line, the inconsistencies and the lack of continuity and chemistry, they really just need to find five that work well together starting in the spring. Injuries are going to happen and you have to deal with that. But above that, and beyond that, you need to be better up front. Because if Iowa struggles again on the offensive front, maybe you make incremental progress with Cade McNamara at quarterback. And I know I've seen some people say, well, even if the offensive line isn't that good, he can escape. Really fast defensive players, good defensive players in the Big Ten. Cade McNamara certainly is mobile and can move the pocket, although he's coming off a knee surgery. And so that compromises him already. But, you don't want to get your quarterback hit or make him run. So they've got to be better up front. And that starts with being able to consistently run the football and still set up play action. So the offensive additions made this year during the portal season, and there's potential to add more too when we get around to the window in May 1st through 15th, when more guys can go in. The guys that are in there now in the transfer portal can still come out. But nobody can go in until May 1st through 15th now. So what's in there now, and you pretty much have to be accepted academically. So Iowa could add somebody out of the portal now after, I forget what the deadline is. Scott knows, and I'll ask him again on the hotspot on Thursday, but it's coming up. I think it's the end of the month, which is today. So if they're not enrolled in class yet, they can't for this semester. So if you took them out of the porthole and say, February 15th, for lack of a better date, they would not be able to join the team until the next semester, which is the summer semester. They can enroll then and then be part of the team. And you're then at that point, you're wondering, there's no binding agreement there. So that can be a little bit dicey as well. All right, let's move on here. I'm sure there are maybe more from Drake Timbers, maybe not. Jesse Lucier at Jesse_Lucier on Twitter. This is from January 26th, so 5 days ago. In your opinion, and as I said, you can fire off HF mail questions anytime between now and the next time I pod, and I'll go back to where I left off and answer your questions. Most of them are Hawkeye related, but if you want to ask me about TV shows, movies, food, as you can see, I'm a big proponent of food. Any of those questions, I'll be happy to answer. In your opinion, what is the worst viewing experience as a fan? A, NFL team going 0-17, B, NBA team going 20-62, or C, MLB team going 60-102. For a positive spin, which of the sports is most fun to watch when your team is good? All right, so this is a personal question just in terms of that last part. For me, basketball is my favorite sport. I love the way they dribble up and down the court, just like I'm the king of the microphone. So is Dr. J.N. Moses Malone. It's Curtis. Ode to Curtis Blow. That deserved the coffee sip. So the Knicks being good would be, for me, the most enjoyable. And then probably the Mets, and then the Jets, and then the Islanders. Those are my favorite teams. Don't really have a favorite college football or basketball team. I enjoy seeing Iowa do well because I get to know the guys. So love to see the student athletes succeed, achieve, and celebrate. So that's that. So again, for me, while the NBA would be the most enjoyable if my team's playing well, Knicks, long history of losing, a lot of suffering. I always say long suffering Mets, Jets, Knicks fan. Islanders won Stanley Cups long time ago. But for me, I think the worst would be the Mets because it's such a long season. Although I'll check out. You can call me a bad fan if you want. I'll check out if it's like June or July and the season's just off the rails, but you still hear it. You still, you get updates on your phone, things like that. Hey, your shitty team lost again. So That probably would be the worst for me. Jesse Lucier, again, this is from January 26th, which was 5 days ago, with another question. Oh, not a question, but a thought. Since 2015, sorry, I got a burn on my hand. Rose Bowl, Iowa. Since the 2015 Rose Bowl, Iowa has won 8+ games. I think 8 or more games, right? Because 8 was in 2016 and 17. So 8 or more games every year, yet they haven't made it to a New Year's Six bowl game. Crazy. We're going on 8 years since the last New Year's Six bowl berth, despite all the winning. This is KF's longest drought, but it doesn't feel like it. Yeah, and I think part of that was winning the West in 21. So that gave you kind of the experience of post-regular season, big game, nationally televised. And then, beyond that, going to, a pretty good game in the Citrus Bowl, still a New Year's Bowl, not a New Year's Six Bowl. But you're right. I mean, and it depends on where you're okay with that bar being. Iowa's won a lot of games, been competitive in the Big Ten West just about every season, come up short, has won one Big Ten West since then. So 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 7 years, one title. So one trip to the Big Ten championship game, but competitive, had some exciting wins. Ohio State at home, Michigan's at home, 16 and 17. It really all depends on you as a fan and what your what's acceptable to you. Not that it matters, not that you can fire coaches. And we have, obviously the offensive coordinator is kind of in the crosshairs of most people in terms of criticism. So, and that's the coach's son, obviously, as we know. So, yeah, I mean, it all depends. You could say, oh, well, we could be Nebraska, but you could also have the success that Wisconsin's had, or Northwestern's won 2 Big Ten West titles since 2015, and you've won one. So, yeah, and then after this season, the Big Ten West likely goes away, and then you're just dealing with a full, 16-team conference where you're competing for the top 2 spots. But then the playoffs also expand in a few years, and maybe you're in that top 12 and you can get into the playoff. But as you said, Jesse, the New Year's Six is basically the equivalent, roughly, of the top 12. So, if you don't get into the New Year's Six, you're not getting into the New Year's Six, you're also not getting into the playoff. You got to raise the bar a little bit more for that. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, it's good points. I mean, it's been a while since New Year's Six, and that last experience was not good, obviously, against Stanford. So we'll see. It's an interesting time for Iowa football. Your head coach is closing in on 70, and how long does he want to coach? We'll see what happens here, potentially with any coaching reassignment or replacement here after signing day. I think we'll hear a little bit more on that, but we'll see. Drake Timbers at Drake Timbers, and this is from January 27th, so 4 days ago. Will the Ivy League starting athletic scholarships along with NIL blow up the FBS like America, igniting the atmosphere of a gas giant like Neptune, bombarding it with nukes until the helium flames into a planetary Hindenburg? Again, it's Drake. Marinate, let that kind of flow around in your head a little bit. I'll take a coffee sip. I don't think it'll blow up the FBS. I think it's nice that they're, offering scholarships to Ivy League schools. Those kids work hard, for their sports. I'm sure as hard and maybe harder in some instances than they do at, other scholarship schools, whether it be, FCS, FBS, Division II, any of those levels. they all work hard, and that's what leads to success. So, yeah, it's nice, especially because Ivy League education is really expensive. So, it must be nice for them. As far as the igniting a Neptune, that I'll leave to somebody else who's into astronomy and or science. I'm into neither. So, let us do a read here. Do a read and maybe take a little break. For some sponsor. I know I had that come up. Let's see here. All right. All right, folks. Support for this podcast comes from Systems Unlimited, celebrating 50 years of providing services to people living with disabilities and mental health needs throughout East Central Iowa. A list of their services and upcoming events can be found at sui.org. That is sui.org. Thank you to Systems Unlimited and all of our sponsors. And you'll hear from a few right now. I will be back on the other side to finish up with your questions and comments on the HF Mailbag Podcast. And we are back. And these questions are all from the last day or so. Actually, from the last 13 hours or so. 44M Less at 44M Less, who I guess is a Regina basketball fan. Got a comment from him after posting a write-up I did for prephoops.com. I watched Regina at West Branch on Friday. West Branch coming away with a win on the boys' side. The Regina girls prevailed, but I digress. I noticed Scott B. brought this up, and I was wondering your thoughts on this as well. As Spencer Lee wins his 4th NCAA title, would you put him on the Mount Rushmore of the greatest Iowa student athletes? What other past or present athletes would you consider? All right, so we're just talking student athletes and not coaches. Let's see here. I think you start with Niall Kinnick. He won a Heisman. You know, that's speaks for itself. And then obviously his off-field contributions also very impressive. So I think you start there. And I'm doing this on the fly. I have not read this question before, which is those people that are used to the mailbag understand that I usually fly by the seat of my pants for this podcast and don't do a whole lot of research. As I said, it's not a very professional podcast, but it's one that I hope you enjoy because it deals with Hawkeye sports. I have to think Spencer Lee would be up there. I try to think from a women's basketball standpoint. I think you got to start to think about Caitlin Clark being on that. I think Luka is somebody who you consider for that from a national player of the year. That just doesn't happen. So let's go with that. Niall Kinnick, but is Luka in over Ronnie Lester? I think that would be an argument for some people as well, because you're comparing errors too, ERAS, and that makes it a little bit more difficult when you're comparing 60s, 70s, 80s to now. The game is so much different. So, yeah, I would say that Niall Kinnick is the start, and then I think it's pretty open after that. I think you can have a collection of guys. Those are people that would put Spencer Lee if he wins his 4th, Luka, Ronnie Lester, football wise, Chuck Long, I think has got to be up in that conversation. Ronnie Harmon, I know that one makes people cringe a little bit, but I think Brad Banks is in the conversation. And I will say, full disclosure, I moved here in 1997 from the East Coast to cover Iowa sports. So that's more of my exposure to Hawkeye athletics. I've obviously followed Hawkeye athletics before moving here, but covering the team is a little bit different. And it's been 26-ish years of doing it. So I have a better handle on guys that I've watched play. But then I also have absorbed many opinions who I respect about the history of Hawkeye athletics. Al Grady being a great one before he passed away. A great resource, as was Bob Brooks, in terms of getting to know the history of Iowa athletics. Ron Gonder as well. And, a lot of guys that have been around here a long time and have a good perspective on Hawkeye athletics. But for me, to keep this podcast from dragging any more than it already is, I would probably say, and I have probably recency bias, but I would put Megan Gustafson is in that conversation too. I think it'd be pretty hard. I would have to think more about it, I think, less, and maybe I'll do that. I'll try to come up with one. I know Pat Hardy wrote a column about this, and these questions come up every now and then periodically when there are, generational type athletes like Caitlin Clark and Spencer Lee, Keegan and Chris Murray, Luca, go down the list. When there are exceptional athletes, we start to talk about, well, who's the best? And that's the Mount Rushmores usually come into the conversation. Who are the four best across all sports? I think you start with Niall Kinnick, and then the conversation gets interesting after that. Spencer still has to win his fourth. I like his chances based on what we've seen this year, but we'll see. We'll see what happens with that, and maybe I'll do something on that coming up in February. Another one from 44MLess at 44MLess on Twitter. In your opinion, has Big Ten officiating been more inconsistent this year than compared to years past? Believe me, I'm not one of those homers that blame the refs for a loss, and it's a tough job. However, it seems to be a lot of questionable calls so far this season. Yeah, it's not been great for across all sports. We saw it in football the other day at the end of the Chiefs-Bengals games. A lot of questioning of the officials. I've not noticed it being any worse than this year in past years, but I will admit I don't focus a lot on the officiating. I know that's maybe a cop-out, but that's just, I think that stuff has a way of evening itself out over a course of a game and a season. But I do also understand that a call here or there can change the outcome of contests, of games, of matches, things like that. So I certainly can understand the focus on it. I did see the referee, I forget his first name. Is it John Higgins? I think it was ESPN who put up his travel schedule based on which games he's done recently, and it was absurd. I mean, he refereed a game out on the West Coast, I think Friday or Saturday night, probably Saturday night, and then was in the Midwest. It was a night game on the West Coast, so it would have started 8 or 9 o'clock Central Time. He did that game, then flew to the Midwest and did a morning or afternoon game here in the Midwest the next day. And he's had a schedule like that where he's just going day to day officiating games. I don't think that's good for anybody, just from the nature of being tired and exhausted and being able to do your job. So that's something I think that can be looked at and addressed. But in terms of, these guys are the best at what they do, and they make mistakes. And it always seems like those mistakes are aimed at, just taking it out on your team. And I think that's what gets under people's skin, that they feel like the officials are out for their team, but everybody feels that way, right? So again, I think it averages itself out over time. And maybe do a better job of training officials and having more officials so they don't have to work as much. And then, pay them more so they don't have to work regular jobs. And if you're a college basketball official, it's not a full-time job. They have other professions, most of them. So they are being pulled in various directions in their lives. And that certainly can impact their job performance as it relates to refereeing. E at NBA_fan_2014 asks, is there anything that Chris Murray can do to become an NBA lottery pick? What is a lottery pick? What now? Is that through 13? Let me Google it because I don't know. NBA lottery picks. How many? How many are in the lottery? 10. All right. So top 10, according to what I looked up here anyway, that's going to be tough. There's some like generational type talent at the top of this thing, with the kid from France and another kid that's in the G League that are, pretty much locks to be the top 2 picks. So, you're talking 8 spots after that. Chris is a little older. He'll get dinged for that. But he's going to have to work out well. I'm not sure there's anything he can do during the season. I'm pretty sure people know what he can do at this point. It's going to be when he has like workouts with teams, combine, things like that, where he can maybe impress people a little bit more and bump himself up. But I think he's shown enough this year that he's a first-round pick. And to get into that top 10, probably going to have to take his game to another level during this season. And Iowa's going to have to do well. And then he's going to have to continue that in postseason workouts. But to be honest with you, I don't know, the other players that are going to be available in the draft. But right now I'm seeing Chris projected like, mid-teens. So I don't think it's outlandish to think that he can work his way up. Consistency, a little bit more consistency. Chris has a tendency to take some shots that make you scratch your head a little bit. And maybe he feels like he needs to do that on this team, especially when Patrick was out because of needing the offense. And he thinks he can make everything, which is a good trait to have. But I think just some more consistency from Chris on both ends of the floor. I think that's probably what he can do. But at this point, going into February, most teams know who he is and what he is. And I don't think he's going to have anything to worry about in terms of being a first-round pick. So getting up into the lottery, I think he has a chance. But if he doesn't, he'll be fine. Clint Harms at Until Game on Twitter. We are in an era with so many transfers and early entries to the pros. With that said, wouldn't college athletics be better off letting players play a full 5 years? We've got a sample of it through COVID, and in my opinion, it's helped upgrade the product. It's a good point, Clint, and I agree. I don't see what the downside other than you have to pay an extra scholarship year. So if a kid redshirted, you would have to pay for 6 years scholarship, but you're going to have to, there's a scholarship limit, so you're paying that anyway. I wonder how that would affect just the flow of high school to college and, what the drawbacks would be there in terms of availability and available scholarships for kids coming out of high school. And that could also help because we'll use the Iowa example, it has 85 scholarships. And uses them on, let's say offensive line. You've got Rusty Feth and Dejon Parker coming in as transfer portal guys. So that takes up 2 scholarships you would have given to offensive linemen in high school. But now those offensive linemen, if they don't end up at Iowa or another Power 5 school, maybe they go to a group of, a mid-major school or an FCS school and excel there and develop, and then they end up in the transfer portal and then you pull them out. So it can work that way too for guys that may not get the opportunity out of high school, but can go to a smaller level college, build a resume, then go into the portal and end up at Iowa like Rusty Feth and Dejon Parker have done. So yeah, I think it'd be good. I think it does help the product when you have experienced guys. You look at, just in watching, Iowa State basketball last night, with Gabe Kalsher and, some of the older guys that are in college basketball, I certainly think it helps. Connor McCaffrey is another example of guys that have been around for a while. I do think it helps the product rather than, stocking up teams with guys that are one and done, two and done, and there's a constant turnover. If you have some stability with maybe some of your role players or core guys, that helps you, helps the maturity of your team each year. So yeah, this is a good idea, Clint, and one that I would certainly be on board with. Be interesting to see if that happens that way. Certainly it's being discussed, and it'd be interesting if they change the eligibility rules. Coffee sip time. Apiragon on Twitter @_Apiragon. I thought about whether or not to read this one. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I will read it because it was sent to me and somebody took the time to do that. There are more important consequences of Iowa GOP extremism. That's this guy's term, not mine. But I wonder about potential impacts on recruiting when a state threatens to ban abortion, enacts don't say gay, trans laws, etc. Have you ever heard feedback from recruits about political situation in Iowa? And that's the part I will address. I have not. And it's not something I would bring up. I don't think that's fair to a 16, 17, 18-year-old kid who's trying to find his college to ask him about political topics. Not something I would ever do. And I would be surprised if I heard that from a recruit, honestly. It's not something that I think is on their minds. They're trying to find a school where they can fit in, have get an education, play a sport. Let the grown-ups deal with the politics. They'll have plenty of times in their life to deal with that and talk about that, and get involved in that. But no, I don't hear anything about politics from recruits, and I don't consider racism politics. It shouldn't be politics. Human rights, things like that, those shouldn't be political. So, I mean, in 2020, I did hear from recruits about, the racial bias at Iowa. And I still hear things like that on the recruiting trail. But in terms of like policies and politics, I don't hear that. So appreciate the question. And we will move on. Let's see here. I'll go back to the chat room in a minute. Let me, got one more here from Jesse Lucier @Jesse_Lucier on Twitter. If Iowa plans to move on from BF, options in coaching world are becoming limited this time of year. However, Josh Gaddis just got fired. Do you think he can be a potential replacement, or is Iowa's lack of urgency a sign they're hiring from within, assuming BF is gone? I'll address that last part. I'm not assuming he's gone. I know you're saying these questions are pertinent if he is gone. I think odds are he's back, to be honest with you. The only way is if he decides to go, and that's to the NFL. He's not going to be fired. That would have happened already, right? So reassigned, given different responsibilities. I think the common belief here and kind of what the speculation centers around is the John Budmeyer edition last year as a consultant, I guess you would call him, or he's an assistant coach. I don't care what the term is. He was helping with quarterback coaching and coaching offense last year. So does another coach move on from the staff, opening up a full-time spot for him where he and Brian can collaborate on the offense? To me, that's the most likely scenario. If that's going to sell for you guys, that's up to you. I don't know. And I don't know what that'll be. If Brian is run game coordinator, Bud Meyer's pass game coordinator, they work together to put an offense together along with working under the umbrella of Kirk Ferentz's philosophy. To me, that's a lot of cooks and it makes it a lot harder to work together, but who knows? I like what I've seen from Josh Gaddis when he was at Michigan. That was kind of they ran Big Ten football with some variation and some modern um, philosophy, modern approach to that offense. I think he could work within what Iowa does, but I'm not sure that that happens. This is just me speculating without knowing. I think it's Brian Ferentz and John Budmeyer collaboration for Iowa's offense next year. Don't hold me to that, but I think that's where we're at right now. Certainly that can change after tomorrow. I think we'll know more going forward this month being February, but we'll see. I don't know. I don't have like a strong feeling that Brian is headed out, but maybe. I don't know why he'd want to put himself through that other than he makes almost $1 million a year, which I'd put up with a lot for that. So potentially he could move on to the NFL. I mean, Bill O'Brien being hired as the Patriots offense coordinator, I think is a potential landing spot. If Brian wanted to do that, he would have to take a pay cut, obviously, and be a position coach, not a coordinator, but maybe that would be more enjoyable to him. But you have to understand that he would also be moving his family halfway across the country away from his parents. He has kids. That's a consideration as well. So we'll see. I'm not sure what will happen there. Nobody's really sure. But that, if I was betting right now, if I was putting money on it, that would be it, that there's some type of collab at offensive coordinator. So check the chat room here. That didn't take off like I had hoped. I thought maybe you guys would hop in there and ask me some questions, but it did not happen. As I said, Hair Trigger 83 said he's just here listening, and I appreciate that. We have 8 people watching the stream that started 46 minutes ago. Maybe we'll try this again next week, and maybe after some repetition here, it'll take off a little bit. But Jesse Lucier is also in the chat room. Well, the SEC recruits at the best, and half their team wasn't allowed 50 years ago, so probably not. 60 years ago. Yeah, I'm not going to say you don't have a point there, Jesse, but I think that is it for this edition of the Mailbag Podcast. I appreciate everybody listening. Maybe you guys can jump in the chat next week, throw some questions my way. I don't know if that's going to be a regular occurrence here. We'll see how it goes. I was kind of a trial run today to see if the chat room was another avenue for you guys to get at me, but Hair Trigger says, I expected Brian would be around, never got my hopes up. Yeah, I wasn't getting my hopes up either way. I just want Iowa to be better on offense, whatever that combination is. And I know there are restrictions there based on the head coach and working under his umbrella, as I said, in his philosophy. So we'll see, guys. We got some time here before the season. Hope for the best. Don't expect the worst is what I would recommend. So that's going to do it for the Mailbag Podcast. Thanks again, everybody, for listening. Thanks for the folks that did make it to the YouTube live stream. Maybe we'll push that a little bit more next week, and they'll have a better chance of that working and you getting a little bit more involved that way. But I appreciate everybody's questions on Twitter. Thank you to our sponsors, and we will talk to you a week from today. It'll be February.